This morning we will be discussing with the author Prayag Akbar, his book Mother India. So I assume some of you at least will think Nargis, the old Bollywood actress, Nargis when you say Mother India, because of the 1957 film. But this novel is anything but about Nargis. It's hugely about contemporary India. And the India where the youth are influencers and content factory makers and living in between these and the people around them. It's generally, I think I'll leave that portion of it to Prayag to talk about it. So please introduce the book to us.
Hi everyone. Thank you, first of all, Sunita, and thank you all for coming. So my book, Mother India, which is my second novel, it's told in the voice of two people. There's a chap called Mayank. It's set in Delhi, first of all, and it's told in the voice of a young man called Mayank who works for a YouTuber. He works for a YouTube, sort of one of these daily political commentators on YouTube. He's a right-wing YouTuber who runs a show called Kashyap Ji Ka Right Arm Fast, and it's about a girl that who works at a mall in Delhi. She works at a high-end chocolatier. I don't know if you have them down here, but up in the north, there's been a whole spate of these high-end, very fancy chocolate, gourmet chocolate kind of companies that have come in from Japan and all sorts of places. And Nisha, my protagonist, works at one of these stores. She's a salesperson. She's very good at her job. And without her realizing it, one day, Mayank basically he's tasked by his boss. His boss asks him to make an image of Mother India, a meme of Mother India, Bharat Mata. And so he needs the right face. He's looking for the right face. He's hunting. Where do you look if you're sitting in a basement in Delhi, in a dark and dingy basement in Delhi and trying to find this image? Where are you going to find this image of this beautiful, ethereal, representation that he needs? And so he goes to Instagram and he starts looking through Instagram and he's scouring Instagram and he comes across this girl. And he's very taken by her. He kind of falls in love, or he feels an attraction, and so he uses her photograph to create this meme. And that's actually the starting point. That's the first page of the novel, and it goes from there. Like their lives kind of spin out of control. Mayank, through his kind of unwitting act, and an invasive act that he perpetrates, and Nisha in response to that, but also as she's building her own life. She's a very determined and capable person who leaves her home. She comes from the hills of Uttarakhand, and she's a migrant to Delhi. And while she's there, this thing happens to her, and she realizes at some point during the narrative. But that's what my story is about. It's not a very, very long novel. It's what's called a novella. It's basically about these two people. I think more than anything else, it's about these two people and how their lives kind of collide in a way without either of them realizing the consequences.
So this novel is about suburban internet children, rather. You could call them that, isn't it? So, they are not a new species to us because Kerala has many more of them. So I think you have started a narrative about internet children and how they think, how they behave. Your voice has really come through in this. So can you tell us how you came about writing this?
It was thank you, first of all. It was a challenge because, I'm not, both my characters are about 22, 23, and that was a long time ago for me. And so I had to kind of really imagine what it would be like to be at that age, and to kind of grow up inside the internet. When I was a kid, the internet just sort of popped up. It was around, and we were using it. But these children, I mean, I can't call them children because they're 22 and 23, and they're working and contributing to society and helping their families, survive. In many ways, this is a book about how a young person would negotiate the new economy, how they would negotiate this new digital landscape, which is so empowering in some ways and so frightening in some ways, because I teach at a university very close to here, actually, in outside Chennai, and I teach creative writing there. And so I meet a lot of people of that age group, 20, 21. A lot of people in my classes are that age, and it's really interesting to me to see how enabled they are, how artistically enabled they are. They they can reach out to people across the world and collaborate with people across the world. I have this very talented animator in one of my classes. She works with people across the world when she needs to. They might write something with someone sitting in Eastern Europe, but in other ways also there's so much opportunity for them, and there's so much competition. The sense of competition is so sharp that in some ways it also, it disables them. So it enables them and disables them. And I was trying to think about that, what it would be like to grow up with that sense of competing against the whole world. When we were when I was in school, I was competing against the children in my class. It was like, can I write it better than this person, or can I do math better than this person, or whatever. And now they're like, no, you have to write. It's like a global standard that everyone's being held to, which must be daunting in a way. And for me, I was thinking about that a lot when I was writing the novel, and trying to think about what it would be like for Mayank and for Nisha to have to make their way and find themselves even through all this.
The title is really interesting, Mother India. So tell me about it.
So again, it's because of the image of Mother India. That's a very important image in the book, because her face gets used to create this kind of rendition of Mother India, and then that goes viral, and Mayank becomes Mayank's boss loves him for it, and she's very upset. Her family's upset and things like that. So it was a central image to the book. I'm very fascinated by the whole topic of Mother India, because it's as you said about Nargis and things like that. I mean, that Nargis film was important because it was right at a very important moment of nation building for us. It's just after independence, and I feel, I'm not sure, but maybe the first decade after independence. And so, there was a lot that was happening that was, crucial in terms of how India came to see itself. India saw itself through that lens, almost. The farm life, and, how important that was. And for me, when I was kind of writing this story, I was thinking of it in terms of almost updating that, There's that image of India is, in some ways holds true, but in many ways doesn't anymore. And certainly young people don't want to think of that as the Indian future. And the Indian future that I was trying to look at the Indian future that maybe is represented by, the internet today, and even how an image like that would be used. I think they talk about this. My characters talk about this in the book. They're like, who cares about this? Why would we even, why would a young person care about Bharat Mata or Mother India? And in many ways it's true, but it is an old, outdated image in some ways. But I was just thinking about how it can be used, and in this book is used by right-wing forces to basically challenge people's patriotism and challenge people's ideas of who they are, and that is what I'm interested in. Like this idea of nationalism and this idea of one kind of nationalism, and people keep, because of my first book, and I suppose even because of this, people ask me, it's like, oh, why do you always criticize the country? But I was like, that's a form of nationalism too. It's not, there's not only one way of being a nationalist.
So Prayag's first book, Laila, is speculative fiction, futuristic speculative fiction.
Yes.
and it's about a possible Hindu Rashtra coming up. But I think you were milder in that. This is now. I mean, Mother India is now what is happening right in front of you, and you're looking at, you're taking a peek into what is happening behind the scenes. So, did you have any research on this, or content factories, or did you come across it during your journalistic life?
No, this was well after my time in journalism. But I did do some research. I spoke to people who work in YouTube channels. I visited one office. It was slightly bigger than the one I portray in the story, but it's a fascinating world because it's kind of like journalism in that the deadlines are nuts, like they're crazy. You have to constantly publish, otherwise you're not relevant, and that creates a kind of a challenge to ideas of truth because the idea of fact is not really that important. Everything is mutable or everything is changeable, and one of the characters says it. It's like it doesn't really matter what the fact is because tomorrow we have to post again, and we can always convert something and change something. And in that ways, those are the challenges that are faced by all of us now because we consume this media constantly. We're all in this habit of taking in this content constantly. So it is. We have to be careful about what we see, but I think these channels, because they're not going to be responsible about what they put out there,
But I think even before Mayank's entry into, the AI world, Mayank's mother had an episode. I mean, that must be surely 2 decades ahead. In the story, the protagonist's mother, she also had a bad viral moment. So I think when you come from the past virality and the current virality, what is the difference you see?
I was thinking about this because his mother suffers this very horrible thing that happened to her when Mayank is a very young man, young boy, and it was like an MMS incident. I don't know if you guys remember what MMS is, but it was this multi-mixed media messaging. And it was the earliest form of kind of virality I remember was, people were passing around these kind of voyeuristic videos of women and things like that were going around. And, they would just land up on people's phones. And it was a very kind of troubling phenomenon, even back then for me when I was very young myself and I would see it. And now we have a completely new form of virality, which is, this global virality almost. That was a very localized thing. It would be in a neighborhood or amongst a friend circle or something like that, or maybe spread a little bit more than that. But now it's this kind of thing. You just post it on whatever, TikTok or whatever there is, and then it's just this globally disseminated thing. And again, for me, it was interesting because, with my students, I see that awareness also, of their own actions. There's a kind of prescription around what they feel comfortable saying and doing because they're aware. It's like, it's Orwellian in that sense. There's cameras everywhere, and they're always being watched. And the one thing I talk to about my students is, I feel lucky that I didn't go to college at this time when you could just do whatever you wanted and you didn't feel you were going to be filmed and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, you could be part of content anywhere, anytime, and without you knowing it. Yeah. So the way Nisha becomes Mother India there, I think you should speak about that. What happened to Nisha? Not without, no spoilers, but...
So with Nisha... She's this girl who's working at this mall, so she's not aware that any of this is kind of happening to her, but she's doing her job, and someone stumbles upon her image. This actually happened many years ago. I remember there was an actress whose photograph was used for a campaign on Love Jihad, and she was not aware of this campaign. She was not aware that someone was using her photograph.
Of her fame.
And they just used her photo. And they used it because she was dressed in this very traditional Indian garb, and she looked like this traditional Indian wife or mother and wife, and so they just used her photo. And then so I was really interested, since that incident, I've been very interested in how your kind of face or your appearance can be co-opted into something you have no idea about. And for Nisha, that's what happens. You know, she gets utilized for by Mayank, by his boss, she gets created. You know, so and then she loses in some senses a sense of who she is herself, because just for briefly, because she's it must be very disorienting to see yourself blown up and utilized in this way when you can't recognize that part of yourself or inside yourself.
I think when Mother India happened, Nargis had the same issue. Like she
really?
was converted into the picture of what an Indian woman should be. I think we followed that example, that model for a long time, that this is the Indian woman. I think the recent case of that girl, that pretty girl in Kumbh Mela, see how her picture took off.
Absolutely.
I think you should talk about that. I mean,
I'm not. I just saw because this writer Shobha Dey had posted a video or something of her, but it's quite amazing because then it's people see a clip, people see an image, and then they read all these meanings into it. They invest all these meanings into it. Oh, she's the perfect embodiment of Indian culture, and she's not like this. She's got this traditional look, but also modern, and she's obviously very pretty and all of that, and she's pretty in a way that we don't see Bollywood actresses. There's all these comments underneath these things, and all these meanings are being read into her face. That we don't know anything about that person, and no one is even bothering. No one cares that much about who the person is, and that's what I wanted to do with Nisha, was really try and see who this person is, what her aspirations are, what she wants out of life, and then how it could be derailed. And for me, Nisha is she's the protagonist of the protagonist of the book, but it was the entirety of her life that I was trying to capture, write about, which is, in this brief window that we get, like I wanted to show all the things she'd given up to reach where she's reached, and her family and things like that, all the things she's left behind, and so that she can fulfill her professional dreams and her all of that.
The loss of privacy is really an issue that we need to, even lawmakers should be looking at it. I think the more people write about it. Now when you write in fiction, people actually get it. If you write an article, I don't know, serious readers may get it, but when you write that in fiction, you identify with it. Loss of my privacy it's my precious thing. If I'm losing it, it means that I cannot go on and do anything else. In previous years, it only used to be Hollywood stars or sports stars who needed to cover their face. Now we can wear a mask. In fact, I saw our old icon Amol Palekar sitting in the in the lounge there. He was wearing a mask, and I was thinking, I thought he was you, and I was thinking, is that Prayag? I was trying to identify and ask the girls there. So they said, no, that's Amol Palekar. So it's like, see, even now when he wears a mask, you cannot recognize him. His privacy is actually secured, but look at me or you. If you walk across and you get caught in a moment which is not very nice, we could be famous or infamous as it is.
Absolutely, it is very frightening actually.
It is frightening. Yes.
But and that's also like not even the there are benign uses of all this technology,
yes.
And now governments are using it increasingly, and facial recognition and things like that. So we're just at the as I say, like I did a session in Bangalore, and I was talking about this, and there was this person, someone who worked in AI. Bangalore is such a techie city, and someone who worked in AI would ask me a question about where first of all, I was like, you should be telling me. I don't know what's going to be happening in the future, but I think we're literally on the we're in the precipice. We're just at the start of what's happening in terms of this social media or enabled computer enabled sort of technologies, and if you think about it, like you can think about it like smoking. When people first started smoking cigarettes, children were smoking cigarettes, and everyone, no one cared, because you smoke like 60 cigarettes a day, or there was no kind of restriction because no one understood the implications. And I think in that stage we're really at that kind of floundering stage right now, where no one really understands the implications of what we're going through. And there was this book by Jonathan Haidt that came out earlier this year about anxiety, and how smartphones are leading to anxiety and things like that. But literally, there's no research, there's no data right now. It's still too young for there to be like really meaningful data. So all we can do is kind of just experience that moment. It's like being at the start. When the first colonials arrived, you're just at the start of it, and you don't realize you're in the 400-year arc. You're at the start of a 400-year arc or a 300-year arc, and that's how powerful and sort of transformative this technology can be.
Right as we were coming in, the Kerala government budget was being relayed on TV, and first sentence I read was they had allotted 10 crore rupees for the development of AI. They're putting up some study centers and stuff. So AI is playing a large part in Mother India, this book. So can we talk about that?
About the Kerala budget? Or?
No. Your book, of course.
Okay. It's just interesting because, when with AI and all, these guys talk in such crazy figures like $500 billion and something like that. And so is 10 crores enough? You never know. It's to do anything, I don't know. But, the Chinese just did that thing for 6 million, DeepSeek. But it's an interesting thing with me in this book. It's not really it's not a big part of the book. I'm no expert on AI or anything like that. What it is he uses this he uses a image creation AI like Midjourney or something like that. He uses one of those to create an image of this woman, Bharat Mata, and this figure, Bharat Mata, and so he feeds Nisha's photograph into that AI, and I think that is increasingly something that happens. It's usually a composite of different people, but you will input these technologies, and this is something that I work towards in the book. These technologies, we think of them as data driven and computer driven and algorithm driven, and that actually there's always people behind these things. There's always people controlling these things. There's a very good book by a writer for the New Yorker called Kyle Chaka is his name, and he wrote this book called Filter World that came out last year, and in that he compares the algorithm to the Mechanical Turk. Like there's this idea that there was this robot that could play chess and all back in the day, but there was a man inside it and who was controlling this, controlling that machine, and just hiding under the guise of a machine. And what he compared it to was, he was like, the algorithm is like that. We think we say it's just people and data and it's all these different things, but actually there are people, like as we've seen with Twitter, Musk controls that algorithm. Zuckerberg and all these people control Threads and Instagram and Facebook, and so these people are individuals with very overwhelming power over our over what we get to see. And so instead of ascribing it to technology or ascribing it just to data or something like that, we should be cognizant of the fact that there are very powerful people with a lot of control. And it's different from Rupert Murdoch and things like that we grew up with, because they didn't have this pervasive control over everything. And I think that's something we also have to recognize, that the world is changing, and a few people are really, really overwhelmingly powerful. They're like they're like Bond villains from the 90s. There was all these Bond villains who were these media tycoons and things like that, and these guys are like that. They actually have that kind of control.
Could you read a couple of sentences from the book?
Okay, I'll just read the start, because this is when Mayank and Nisha meet. Not meet, virtually kind of he sees her. He gets a glimpse of her online. So I'll just read that little bit. Mayank was not prone to falling in love. He liked to avoid such distractions. As he assured all who happened on his Twitter bio, appended most recently with 3 tricolor and 1 temple emoji, it was his nation he loved first. How he loved his country. When the anthem sounded before a World Cup game against the great enemy and the handsome old flag began to flutter and flick, he'd feel a sure weight in his throat, as if pride had stopped his power to speak, and he'd have to fight back the ready drop that threatened to form at his eye. Yet, here was today, this instant, a moment that seemed to pulse with the unmistakable message that he'd fallen feet first. The girl had a faraway look in her pale green eyes, dupatta demure around her head, an endearing mole, a light brown diamond, on her left cheekbone. Strung around her as a canopy were hundreds of small and large metal bells darkened by age and swatches of thin red cloth with tasseled gold borders. The photograph had been taken at Golu Devata temple, but where on earth was Gorakal? Her bio gave little information save her age, 23, and sign, Libra, the scales of justice rendered in a geometric symbol that Mayank remembered faintly from school and now looked up, falling briefly into a wiki hole explaining Euclidean equipollence. Once he emerged, confused and mildly regretful, he watched the first video Nisha had posted, set to a soft rhythmic peal, a slow-motion clip shot from behind of her climbing the temple steps.
Thank you. So there is this third character which we haven't spoken of, the JNU student.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think you should bring him into perspective because JNU is a very hot word, yeah? So
Yeah. It's a hot word here,
Yes.
well, also in Delhi. So JNU is, as you all know, is Jawaharlal Nehru University. It's this kind of hotbed of, it used to be an intellectual kind of hotbed where you had all these kind of conflicting views and, anti-authoritarian thinking that they encouraged. And my character in my book is one of the last kind of holdouts in that sense. You know, he's railing against the system, and he's been picked up, he's been arrested because he refuses to acknowledge, he's been asked to say Bharat Mata Ki Jai at a meeting. And there's a whole gang of kind of people show up at one of his meetings, and they start demanding that he chant this, Bharat Mata Ki Jai and things like that. And, he just refuses because he feels that if I want to say it, I'll say it. I'm not going to say it under duress. And that leads to his arrest because it's seen as an anti-national thing. And so, as of course, this is not an unfamiliar story. We all know who I'm talking about. This is honestly taken from a true to life incident, but I wanted to try and capture again, Mayank is not the person who kind of sets that whole thing in motion, but he's part of the kind of the movement of hate that, castigates that man or vilifies that man and makes him into a villain. And I was really interested in this idea of creation of villains that we have on the internet now. This idea that there's a line in the book about how on the internet, if you really want success, you don't need ideas, you need enemies, and that really is, I think, something I've observed on the internet. You can really build these huge followings by just, creating enemies, and YouTube is a great place for that. They're all picking on each other, and it's almost like, I don't know if you guys listen to hip hop, but like they're like facing these hip hop battles, and they use that to build clout, and and social media is like that, and the internet is like that, and YouTube is like that, and this guy is vilified, and all these other people, all these small media sort of outfits building their base on that vilification, and and so it becomes so easy to build that hate and try and and honestly the way they do it, when I did this deep dive into YouTube shows, so I did left wing, right wing, everything, and American, some of the American kind of merchants of this kind of toxic discourse. And the Americans are masters of it, by the way, because I think they have a lot of it, they have talk radio and things like that, so they're really manipulative, they really know how to manipulate stuff. And a lot of the Indian commentators are picking up cues from there. You know, a lot of them are engineers abroad, I think, not just engineers. Like a lot of them are living abroad, and the Indian commentators, and so they pick up cues from there, and they utilize it so well. I mean, I remember I was telling people I did a session in Lucknow, and I was telling people that, well, not on stage, but off stage, that, you know, like I was watching one of these videos, and you know, it was a video on bulldozer justice. I don't know if you guys know what bulldozer justice is, but the chief minister of Uttar Pradesh was a big proponent of it, where they were sending in bulldozers into these slums and knocking down these very poor neighborhoods, many of them chiefly Muslim, but it felt quite targeted. You know, these bulldozers were going in and basically, you know, finding criminality and finding illegality, and you know, trying to beautify the city and things like that. And I was watching this video, and it was done by this right-wing commentator, and you know, just something I thought I felt very strongly about. And then I was watching this video, and he's making his point and he's building his point. And I was like, oh wow, I kind of agree with him. He's doing it so well. You know, they're actually able to kind of manipulate the way you think, and they use memes very cleverly, and they use popular media very
I
cleverly.
think you should use the word influencer. That is how they are born now. Influencers are everything, right from how you dress to what you think to how you vote. Everything comes from the influencer. That is why I mean.
Do you find yourself influenced? I mean,
I don't
in that
watch
sense?
these. I don't get a time to watch these
You
things
don't?
unless I'm researching for something. But then yes, they are very strong. See, it's not like a leader is somebody who comes, you know, stands in front of the mic, or he gets into the parliament or the Niyama Sabha. But no, it's not that way. You have influencers. You can see trillions of followers for some people. They are actually speaking very ordinary things, but people identify with them. So it is this content, you know, this influencers content. And
but that was actually a big realization for me when I was researching, thinking about the book. First, I had these guys working in more traditional media, and then even like, you know, I was thinking about Twitter and places like that. And I remember going to YouTube for the first time and actually seeing the difference in the numbers. You know, the scale of their reach is something remarkable. Like, you know, someone like Rajdeep Sardesai, who's such a well-known journalist, one of our best-known journalists, years and years and years. On Twitter, he might have a few million followers. And then there'll be some person who does like, you know, like a makeup tutorial on YouTube, and they'll have like 20 million followers or something, you know. And it's just remarkable to me, the scale of that and how much bigger a platform YouTube actually is.
You just need to be the daughter or son of a celebrity.
Well, that also I'm sure helps.
Some celebrities have
I'm
all
talking
their children making YouTube videos and getting a huge following. That happens.
Really?
They don't do anything by themselves, but being the offspring of a celebrity itself is a legacy that will get them YouTube views. You know?
I'm sure. Yeah.
So let's just take a look at Laila. And how about that? Tell us something about that web series. I think Netflix. It went on Netflix, right? So Deepa Mehta directed it, isn't it? So tell us about it.
What about it? So what exactly? So yeah, Netflix made a show out of my first book called Laila. The first book was called Laila. It was directed by Deepa Mehta, and Huma Qureshi was the kind of she starred in. So Laila was about this woman who's searching for her daughter. Her daughter gets taken away from her, and her husband is killed in an act of political violence. Maybe you can see some similarities in the themes, but so you meet her in when she's been living for 16 years in this kind of dystopian society, and it's a story of her journey, why she's hunting for her daughter in this society where her movement is proscribed. She can't move around, she can't freely access lots of parts of the city because it's divided along lines of caste. And it was a book that I wrote some 6 years ago, I think it came out. And the show came out
in 2019. The show was in 2019.
Yeah,
I remember that.
So
book much before that, I think. 3 years
no.
before that.
1 or 2 years.
One or two
It was almost. They bought the book almost as soon as it came out. I was very lucky.
It was before COVID. I remember that. I remember.
Yeah,
reading it,
absolutely.
yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, and it was you're very. I mean, it was a great honor that they made the show. Um, of course, it got a lot of backlash from like political backlash, but it was wonderful to see. Like you, when you're writing a book, I remember my wife. I was telling my wife, we were living in Bombay at the time. My wife was working in advertising, and she was reading the book while I was writing it, and she's like, "Oh, maybe someone want to do this," and I used to laugh at her. I was like, it's so political. Like, who's Karan Johar is going to make like, Laila? So I never thought about it as anything that could be translated to screen or anything like that. I was just writing this kind of dark story that I wanted to write. And then it just so happened that Netflix came into India at that time and they were looking for political, like edgy new kind of content. And they didn't want to do the traditional Bollywood stuff then. So I got very lucky.
How do you think Mother India can go into a visual representation? I mean, I've always thought, things which talk about the internet, they are a little skewed that way, but it requires a really clever screenwriter to make us watch it. What do you think about it?
I don't know. I'm not really a screenwriter. I'm mostly like prose. But I have seen some really good movies that capture that whole internet world. There's a very cool movie with the actor John Cho called Searching, where he's searching for his daughter, and it's all just on. Basically, all you see is him using the internet to hunt for his daughter. It's a very interesting concept for me because like it's the visuals, everything is just the screen, and it's really powerful actually how they do it. But I wouldn't know how you translate things to the screen.
Is this getting into any translations now? Mother India?
My agent is in discussion with people about that. I'm not. You mean I'm talking about different languages?
Yes.
Yeah. So she deals with that.
Okay. So you teach at Korea. Are you a regular or a visiting?
I teach. I teach. I've been teaching there for 6 years. I'm visiting faculty, but I spend 3 months of the year there.
What do you teach?
Creative writing.
Creative
Yeah.
writing.
It's a very popular. I mean, a lot of young people want to study creative writing, and even as it's fun for me because I get to think about first principles and think about writing all the time, and I really enjoy it.
Okay, it's a popular course. People like it now.
Yeah, I
mean,
think so,
we used to go outside for this, East Anglia and everywhere now.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even in my time, it was very difficult. You didn't think about it as an option, actually. So I'm really happy that now Indian students get to do it. We have so many students from Kerala, actually, who come.
Okay.
Yeah, come to the university, come to my class. I really enjoy it, and I think the students get quite a lot out of it because. The class seems to be popular.
How about your journalism? What do you do in journalism these days? Are you staying away from it?
I haven't. The last time I did any journalism was years ago. I think I wrote something. I mean, I would write op-eds sometimes even after my first novel and this. But I haven't even been doing that. I don't really have that time. Also, it's like the op-ed whole system seems to be, the internet has really cannibalized it in that, it's like, do you need an op-ed or do you need a tweet? Like, someone can just put it out in a tweet, so.
Where would you place Mother India? And, the books that are coming out, what genre?
I don't know.
I think it's, I thought it was between, like it's a contemporary fiction then definitely, but that doesn't define it in a genre. Like it is literary, but again it is faster than literary. So that's what I thought.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, I think of it as literary fiction, but like there's a writer I really admire, J.M. Coetzee, and he said, I remember, like, if you try and classify his books in one genre or the other, even like the novels that are called like a dystopia, like The Life and Times of Michael Kay, like it's almost unclassifiable, like you can't think of it as one genre or another genre. And, I try and write books like that, like that are not, I read it widely in different genres, and so I think I get influenced by various things, and here I know this is a very fast-paced story, but in that sense I wanted to kind of capture the speed of the internet, how fast information comes at us on the internet, how fast we have to respond to it, how little and how much information is out there. That people tell me there's so much going on in the book, but I think that I wanted to try and capture that feeling sometimes when you're on your phone and scrolling through it, and it's just like being bombarded with this and that. There's the results of some cricket match, and political fallout in Manipur and this and that, and I wanted to be able to try and capture that in a literary sense.
Are you working on anything now? A new book?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Want to give some spoilers?
No, it's way too early. It's the problem is when you first finish a book, you have this. Again, I'm going to use someone else's example, like a director, Paul Thomas Anderson. He said this, when you finish an idea, you have this a lot of creative energy, and you don't know what to do, so you just start dumping it into different ideas. And so I'm at that stage right now. I'm just pouring it into various things and hoping that one of them becomes a book.
Okay. So could you read one more part of the book, somewhere near,
Sure.
like the. I'll read a part. Yeah, nearer the end, where without spoilers, of course, but where something has happened already. There are quite a few moments there which could be interesting.
I'll read something from the Nisha narrative. So Nisha works in this mall, and for me, the new super glitzy malls of Delhi are very much, it's an important terrain almost of the new urban life of Delhi. I grew up in Delhi, and so I saw these giant glass structures come up, in Gurgaon and in Saket and all over the city. And in many ways, they're like a kind of monument to capitalism, They're like these, they have everything, they assemble all these different wares from all over the world, and these crazy prices, and it's things to eat, and they are. It's a really fascinating little microcosm, and once I started thinking of Nisha as someone who works in these malls, and you start thinking of the people who are there not to consume but to contribute. You realize, they're kind of. They're almost two. It's a landscape that you're kind of interacting with in two different ways. There are very divergent ways that they're interacting with these places. They have these tiny rooms that they go to, like storerooms and things that we don't see. So I was very fascinated by that. The corridors were dim and the mall nearly empty. The new guy shut the glass doors, dropped the blinds, cut the overhead lights. Nisha wheeled in a mid-sized white screen from the back room, and soon a projector lit up a beam of floating mites. She had seen this slender Japanese lady 3 times now, talking in painstaking English about the excellence of the Dojuri brand. The Dojuri brand is what I call the chocolate company that she works for. She waited for the admonitory tone. No compromises on quality or storage would be tolerated by Hokkaido. The specter of liability hung darkly. Watching the short training video reminded Nisha of her own first day. A prickle in her arms and legs as she ironed the uniform, zipped up the black skirt, adjusted her buttons so a modest triangle glowed at the throat. Walking with purpose and confidence past the security and into the daunting lobby of Imperium Mall with its golden chandeliers and low honey lights and gliding aromas of lemongrass and green tea. The shop, too, was filled with a thick, rich cocoa butter smell. Sitting low in her plastic chair, Nisha sniffed the air, hoping to catch a whiff of the abundance that had suffused her senses that first day, when her manager Siddharth had used a long thumbnail to sever the shrink wrap on a burnished copper box and lift the lid, revealing a slab of dusty chocolate unlike any she'd seen before. Perfect cuts that hardly broke the surface, like chalk lines on pavement. Siddharth looked up invitingly as the aroma wafted towards his nose, towards all their noses, giving them a warm smile, a welcome into this new world. Once their eyes were on him, Siddharth pushed down with a wooden implement and broke off a few cubes, offering these to the 2 new employees, assuming an air of formality that Nisha until then had only associated with death. Then he folded the fine oily tissue over the remaining chocolate and returned the box to the counter. Nisha spent more than a minute with her cube, allowing it to drop from shape onto her tongue. She noted, when they were closing that evening, that Siddharth took the open box with him. Thank you.
So, can we open for questions, please?
Your first book and the second book are very different, actually. Can you tell me how that journey has been from one totally different books? Like,
Absolutely. Thank you. As you
this is a question that my closest friend also wanted me to ask you, because she's a big fan of yours.
Wow, that's really nice. Yeah, they're absolutely very different. I think that we were talking about this at another venue, but as a writer, you don't want to fit into only one box. And I enjoyed exploring the dystopia genre, with the first book, but I was quite sure I wasn't going to get back into that for the second book. I wanted to do something else. I wanted to write more kind of. I wanted to write a story about our present moment, actually, and try not to. There's a thing about dystopia, which is that it's a kind of distancing. You're creating a world that's distant from the world around us, and there's a safety in that. There's a kind of, it's easy for the reader. It makes it easier for the reader to take in the world presented, because like, oh, this is not my world. This is an alien world, and it's kind of harder to write political fiction about the world around us. Maybe harder or easier, I don't know. But like, it was a new challenge, and I enjoyed doing it. And it was, you had to learn. I had to learn a lot of things again while I was doing it. You have to start reading a lot more in the kind of genre you're actually writing. I read a lot of books that were trying to capture the contemporary, and it's like you train yourself to do anything, as you know. Thank you.
Why do you think the right is much more successful than the left in using the new media? Like in the US election, and I'm from Germany, we have an election coming up, and also there the far-right parties are far better at recruiting people and using these new technologies.
Kerala is different.
Sunita was just telling me about Kerala, and she says that in Kerala the left is very capable.
Yeah, they are powerful here. They have been in the second term. Of course, it's up to the people to say the rest of it, but the votes show that, they have come back a second time. Okay. Even when India was being led by the right wing, Kerala was being led by the left wing. So there is a difference in politics across the country. It's not the same. There are different, strains of politics there.
I think that there is something about the maybe, and this is really like not a considered kind of opinion, but like I think that there is something about the right-wing message that maybe it's easy to break down into a meme maybe, and what do we get when we see something on the internet? We feel a flush of emotion, right? You see an image, you see a video, you get this sudden hit of anger maybe, or annoyance, or a grievance, and those are maybe I'm being reductive, but those seem to be like right-wing kind of, a lot of the right-wing kind of discourse centers upon that, right? Like creating more anger and creating more fomenting, more like, this kind of discontent and all of that. And maybe I'm being idealistic, but the left, you want a more considered view, and you're trying to look at these issues in a more holistic way, and in a more balanced way maybe. But that might be my own bias speaking. I don't know. What do you think? Do you have an opinion on this? Because Germany you're facing it, and
yes, I quite agree, but but maybe the left has to find a way to, I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not do the same really, but I don't know. I just hope that there would be a way to get the other messages across. But yeah, it is easier with, like Donald Trump, simple messages. Yeah, simple wording, simple messages. images. Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
just Musk appearing behind that AFD leaders at the speech, that was such a powerful image, because I just saw that photograph or whatever, and it looked big brother, like, behind the leader, like the force behind the leader. There was so much power in that image already. He just, so, and that becomes a meme that goes all over the country and things like that. All over the world, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to know what is the process of your imagination? Like, you try to find the idea first, then you try to write it, or you just follow the characters, you find the characters, then you try to follow the character's journey on his imagination, or what is the process of your imagination for the books actually?
So with both books, it was very much character-led. So I came up with, I figured out the starting, and and then you kind of follow the character's thread. The problem is that you don't even understand the characters very well when you start. So you write it, and you write another draft, and you understand. It's a very painstaking process, or tedious process almost, because you're writing and then you're like, oh no, that doesn't work. And so you get to know the character as you're writing. You have to like write yourself closer to the character in that sense, and they change and they evolve as you write. So there are, there's a writer called Zadie Smith, and she talks about this. She says there's two different approaches writers use. I don't know, she created this binary, but like she says that there's a type of writer who starts with the first sentence and just flows from there, and there's a type of writer who plans everything out. And I don't know if I agree completely with her, like that it's so stark, the binary, but I do agree that there are some writers who can tell you the whole book before they start writing the book. I'm not one of those guys. Like I have to like keep floundering around, and I go here, there, and then I finally end up 5 years later with a book. So
I think I'm told that's the last question. So Prayag, so happy to have you here in Trivandrum.
thank you.
And since I read both of your books before you came, I'm very happy to have conversed with the author and
you.
seen his thought process and writing process.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Anita.
you.
And thank you all. This is really fun. Thanks.